Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is episode 77, and I'm back again with another great interview with a podcaster this time that I think all of you are probably very familiar with, and I've been a huge fan of his work for a very long time. He is the host and creator of 99% Invisible and the co-founder of all of Radiotopia from PRX. Folks, it is my privilege and honor to welcome the one and only Roman Mars to the Podcast Digest. Roman, thank you very much for joining me.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, it's really great to talk to you because, as I mentioned, I've been a fan for a very long time with a lot of the work that you've done. And I know a lot of the people listening right now probably are. And I wanted to tell folks a little bit about yourself maybe before we kind of jump into the wonderful audio work you've done and are doing. So for anybody who's not familiar with you, Roman, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe where you're from, and how this road took you to where you are?
Well, let's see. I moved around a lot. I mostly say when people ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Ohio because I spent a lot of elementary school and part of high school, through high school there. And when I was a kid, all I wanted to be was either like a physician or a scientist. I loved science. And so I went straight through, began working on my PhD in genetics, ended up at the University of Georgia, where I was working on my PhD, and found that I was not a very good scientist. I was a very good teacher. I was a very good student, but I was never going to be a very good scientist. And that was where I really fell in love with public radio. And I was listening to public radio all the time. I love the way people talked. I love the way they presented their ideas. And I moved out west to San Francisco at about the point where I dropped out of school, thinking that at the time it was sort of the .com bubble, the first one in the late 90s. And I thought, well, I'm smart enough to get a job. And at the time, you just needed a pulse, basically, to have a job in the .com world. And then I could try to weasel my way into an internship in public radio. And it took a long time, but eventually I did. I started working at KLW in San Francisco. And I was an unpaid volunteer at that radio station for 3 years while I was trying to figure out how to do this. And then that led me to WBEZ in Chicago, and eventually I worked on every type of radio show that's existed, really. And then about 5 years ago, I started 99% Invisible. That's the sort of short version of it.
You mentioned WBEZ. From some of the kind of preparation I did for this conversation here, I understand that you spent some time with the folks over at Snap Judgment, correct?
Yeah, well, that was back out here. So BEZ was where I was at Third Coast for 3 years, and then when I was done with that, I had my kids were born. My twins, Maslow and Carver, they were born, and I kind of just wanted to be back out west. I felt in the time period when I was out here in the early 90s, I was in San Francisco for 8 years. I felt like this really became my home, and I wanted to raise my kids out here. So I moved here with the kids, thinking that I was going to get out of radio. And then I started to get lots of like random work, work with PRX, work with KLW News. And at some point I ran across Glenn and Mark, who were the core of Snap Judgment. I was helping them adapt a piece that they were doing for KLW News. And they were, like really talented storytellers, really gifted in every way, but they didn't kind of know the structure of radio, like how to put an hour of radio together and what that would be like. And so I became their first senior producer to help them sort of with that transition. And it was going to be temporary, and then it kind of went a little bit longer, but I was with them for about a year and a half. And so yeah, I really love those guys. They're really, really great. And they produce their show out of Oakland, just like us.
Oh, I've always wondered, because now they are part of WNYC, I believe.
Yeah, they are. I mean, and so before, when we had started, it was completely independent. It was associated with PRX and then a distribution deal with NPR. But it had no affiliation with a station, which is really rare for a show like that. And after years of doing it on their own, they formed a relationship with WNYC, which I think is it's really smart for WNYC because that show is great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of great shows we're going to be talking about here. So I have an interesting take on this. So you talked about that the doctor and the scientist thing wasn't going to fly, and you ended up getting into public radio because of your love of public radio. Did the love of radio and storytelling come before sort of the focus on the design and architecture?
Oh, yeah, by far. I mean, it was like, that was really the goal, was to be in radio. And the design and architecture stuff came later. I'd worked almost for 10 years at that point, doing different things. And especially in Chicago, where I really began to fall in love with architecture, because the architecture there is so stunning, and people are really aware of it, and they spend a lot of time, making you aware of it. So I began to fall in love with architecture there, and when there was an opportunity here where someone we knew, I was at KLW working on the news like one day a week, and someone associated with KLW was the executive director of the American Institute of Architects in San Francisco, and there was this notion of putting on a kind of quick little story, like an architecture minute, about a piece of local architecture on the local edition of Morning Edition here. And Matt Martin, the general manager of KLW, asked me, like, well, what would you think of this? And what would you make of this? Because at the time I'd helped create the news there at KLW. I'd helped create the sound design of Snap Judgment. This was kind of my job at the time, to work on pilots and get them up to speed. And so I knew I had this interest, but I was more interested in this wider story of design in general. And as we talked about that, I began to get really excited about it. And for a while, I thought I was just going to create the show, sound design the show, and find a person to make the show, to make what became 99% Invisible. Because that's normally what I did. I would go someplace, I would work on it for about a year, and then I'd move on to something else. But I loved the discussions I was having with the architects and designers that I was meeting. And I thought of the way that I could approach it would keep me interested for a long time. And it really became my show at that point. And so radio storytelling was way, like 10 years of that before I got into 99% Invisible. But 99% Invisible was the thing that I created specifically because of, I learned the type of stories I wanted to tell in all that time, and design stories were really it. I mean, I loved my time at Snap Judgment, but fundamentally I'm not like a storyteller in that way, like it's very emotional. I'm much more didactic. I much more want to learn something in the process of reporting and then teach something, which is the parts of being a scientist that I loved. Is I was a TA, and I loved teaching, and that was the part where I found the most joy. And the real problem with me when I was working on my PhD is when my classes and my teaching ended, and I just had to do research, and then I learned I really hated it. But until that point, I was super into it because teaching was I loved it. And so this is a way to learn something new, teach it to people, and move on, try, learn something else. And design is a big, broad enough concept that you can kind of make it about everything and nothing at the same time. And so we really follow stuff that interests us. And it had the type of, it was so evocative to me, the whole concept of it, even the name of it was what sort of locked it in for me. So I only discovered that 5 years ago. I never would have thought, I never got into radio to explain design to people. I just got into radio because I loved radio.
In those early days, those early, the pre-99% Invisible, I heard in other interviews that you said it began as sort of almost short little 4-minute segments. Is that right?
Yeah, 99% Invisible started as it was like, so the clock on Morning Edition is divided into these sections. So it fit into what the C block of Morning Edition. So local stations get the feed of Morning Edition or All Things Considered, and they know exact timings of everything, and they can drop in local programming in those spots. And so I was a drop-in of local programming. So originally it was a really strict 4.5 minute program, and that was it. And then I released it as a podcast, mainly because I had friends and they were just like, well, I'm not going to listen to your show streamed off this stupid Tumblr. Like, just like release it as a podcast. And then as it found an audience really quickly as a podcast. And so, and the first complaint was, well, it's too short. I hit play on it and it's over with almost immediately. And then because the nature of the documentaries that we make, it's I have a lot more material always than is being presented. And I was like, well, there's probably a cut before the cut that, there's like a 6-minute cut that exists before it goes down to 4:30 that I could release, because that last little bit is always really painful. And it would be nice, like, kind of pressure relief to like know that there was like a better version of it out in the world that I didn't have to compromise by making it so short. And so I began releasing that, and then quickly the primary product became the longer version that was the podcast version, and then I would cut it down to be 4.5 minutes. And so to this day, now I have someone else do it. Someone else on the staff at KLW does it, but we cut a version of it that's now 5.5 minutes long. It goes on broadcast, but I have very little to do with it. And we don't, it's like, I don't think of it as, the primary product anymore. Like we make the show it's supposed to be, whatever length it's supposed to be. And then somebody else makes sure that it can eventually fit inside of that block in Morning Edition. It's not something I, worry about anymore.
When it was 4.5 or now 5.5 minutes, it sounds like it would be, and you sort of alluded to it, terrifically frustrating, because I know that you're probably this type that really wants to put the best thing possible out to the world. Do you ever feel like it's just not doing the story justice at that length?
Now, because I conceive of them as longer stories, they can be less satisfying. Occasionally, like when somebody like picks a story out of, it's not so much like the right way to do it is to not like take the whole story and condense it. The right way to do it is to sort of pick an aspect of the story and highlight that and be sure that you can tell that complete story. Right. And occasionally that happens and it's like, well, that was actually much more satisfying than the whole thing. Right. Like there's something about that the economy is really, I really value that. In the beginning, the 4.5 was a real relief, because in a way with 4.5 minutes, you don't have to have a story. You can basically have an idea and an essay and a little bit of anecdotal, just like anecdotal facts. And that would be enough, and it would sustain you for 4.5 minutes. That doesn't really work anymore. So, there's some value in each of the form factors. But it's definitely, like when I was only trying to make the 4.5 minute version, it was so, they were fine because that was what I was intending to make. Now that they're sometimes 20 minutes long or so, when they get down to 5.5 minutes, it's pretty hard to do it. Right. But it got to a point where we couldn't devote a lot of resources to it anymore. And so, but KLW was really, really keen on keeping them. So that's their part in this now.
So let's talk about 99% Invisible in its current incarnation. You talked about in the interview that I watched online, and folks, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's right on YouTube. You did a talk, I guess. Was it on the Google campus?
Yeah.
There, an interview. And in that, you talked about that oftentimes you will take pictures as a potential topic inspiration. Is this something you're still doing? And if so, does it help? Do you still find that as kind of the best way to get ideas?
Well, it's not necessarily the best way. It's one of the ways. And it's not so much that I do it to get ideas. I take pictures of lots of things that I see, particularly sidewalk stamps. That's a big one for me. Flags, anything interesting, like any interesting metal part of infrastructure, like a I don't know, like an interesting sewer grate or a manhole cover or something like that. I'm into those things. It's they help me keep my, if I'm aware, then I catalog them, and then they stay in the front of my mind, and then eventually those will become stories. It's just one of the ways that I engage with the world, and it does help. But I would say most of the stories now come from the team of us meeting, either getting pitches from the outside world, or like every week, we go through, 10 or 12 pitches, and those are where the ideas come from these days. I generate a few of them, but a lot of my job is a little different these days.
Let's talk about your team. Let's talk about some of the individuals you're working with to put together this show every week. Who are they, and what do they do?
So the first person I hired was a fellow named Sam Greenspan. He started as kind of an intern. He was based in D.C. He was working part-time at NPR. And then he decided he wanted to move out here, and we were able to raise enough money to pay him part-time. This was during the first Kickstarter, and then as the money was growing, there was, because it was a surprising success, I was able to sort of give him more days a week to work until it became a full-time job. And then, so it was with, he and I worked on the show for maybe about a year, kind of in my backyard, where I have an office, and he would sit right next to me, and we would work on the show, and it expanded the scope of the show. And at a certain point, we thought about having an intern, and I had interviewed a few people, and we discovered Avery Schuffelman, who had been an intern at NPR in various capacities, and worked, I think, temp jobs in various capacities. And immediately when she came out here as an intern, she was just like so good that I basically tried to hire her immediately, and she turned out to be like she's a real key member of the team. And then Katie Mingle, who's our senior editor, I knew her a little bit from Third Coast. She wasn't there when I was there, but she had very good taste, and I knew her. I don't know. We just ran into each other at different Third Coast events, and she had done a piece for me, and it was the first time somebody wrote my parts for me, and she wrote them so well. Like she looked like she wrote me better than me at that moment, and I was like, wow, I feel like Conan O'Brien. I feel amazing, and I'd never thought of a role like that because I was always the producer who did everything, and so she came out, and then for a long time, so Avery and Katie started around the same time. Avery maybe about 4 or 5 months before, and so that was our team for the longest time. And then about 6 months ago, a fellow named Kurt Kolstad, he is creator of a website called Web Urbanist, and he's a fan of the show, and he had just sort of gotten in touch to sort of vaguely say, what, if there's something you need with the website or something like that, maybe I could help you. And I began thinking about it more and more, and I thought, wow, what I'd really want is you just work for us and make us a new website and make a new web presence for the show. Because we began as a show beyond our like audio output to own a certain type of design story, like a really curious decoding of the world type of design story. Because I'd get these tweets from people saying, like pointing to an article, and they're like, where people would say, well, this made me think of you, or this would be a perfect 99 pi. And with our production cycle, we just can't turn all those things into stories, but maybe we could turn them into print articles. And so that became his project. And so, he joined a little bit ago, and has been a godsend. I mean, we just released a new website this week, which makes me extremely happy. It's so great. And makes me, I can't believe how cool it is. And then then I just hired 2 more people. They started last week, Delaney Hall and Sharif Youssef. And Delaney Hall I had hired her as in my intern at WBEZ, and she had moved out here. And so 3 of us, me and Delaney and Katie, had all worked at Third Coast. And then Sharif, we had done an open call for this new producer position, and he was just so charming. He was so on top of things. Really, you could just tell he had hunger and was really gifted. And I was not prepared to hire two people, but there was something about this combination of him and Delaney, which seemed kind of perfect for what we needed. Somebody with a little more seasoned who could do editorial support, and someone who was really brand new who could do some other production support. And so so that's the whole team. And then I also have like an offsite assistant named Taryn. And so she lives in Portland. So that's like, I now have 7 employees, which is totally shocking to me. It was not what I was anticipating when I was doing this show late in my bedroom at night while I was also working on Snap Judgment.
Well, the team obviously is doing phenomenal work, as I'm sure you've heard from so many people. You don't need to hear it from me. And you mentioned the website, and I have seen you recently talking about the new website, especially how it portrays on mobile, and it is pretty darn spiffy. It almost comes out on mobile. I was looking at the other day, and I have a iPhone 6s Plus, so it's a bigger screen, but it almost comes out in mobile looking like its own podcast player. Not exactly, but sort of similar, where it's like, you mentioned earlier how somebody had said, well, I don't want to listen to this from your Tumblr page or whatever. You almost could on mobile just kind of go right from there, and that is impressive for a website.
Yeah, you really could. They so Kurt worked with this LA company called Duck Brigade, and they just were on the ball with it. I mean, they just, every little thing that they wanted to do, I thought was brilliant. They really thought about it as a mobile experience, and so it'll be interesting to see how many more people stream it the way that you're suggesting versus download it as a podcast. The player is really slick. The presentation is really slick. It makes me really happy. But it was one of those things, like, I had no skill set to even to not only design it, I mean, that's obvious, but not even project manage it into existence. Like, I had no ability to make those decisions. And that's what Kurt brought to the table.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it now on the desktop. And folks, of course, the link to the website will be in the show notes. But, I mean, you've got it on the episode tab and really on the main page as well. You've got episodes broke down into 8 main categories. You've got a playlist feature where folks could literally kind of pick and pluck what seems interesting, add to a playlist, and just hit play and let them run. I mean, it is really, really impressive. I really like what you guys have put together here.
Oh, I mean, thank you. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, what the team has put together, for sure.
I mean, that's
really
that's the biggest change. I mean, like, really, as a, for 15 years I've been a public radio producer, and to me, a producer is is a sacred position. It's the person who gets things done, and it doesn't matter what high level or low level. It's just the person who has to get things done. And for the first time, I've been delegating these things, and other people have been taking them on who are more talented than I am. And I've been around plenty of people who are more talented than I am, but they didn't work for me. And it's really great to watch people make the show so much better. It's a different feeling. There's a different sense of pride with it all.
Was the delegation hard for you?
Totally. But not because of pride or anything, just because I didn't know how to turn it off, and I didn't know how to ask people to do things that I wasn't willing or qualified to do. And so it is unnatural to me, and I'm learning to do it a little bit better. But it was really hard. I mean, I was the grunt worker. I always did the job. And to this day, I mean, I still work a lot, and I value them having a normal schedule. So my team, I try desperately for them to not work nights. They do not work weekends. Occasionally when there's deadlines, something comes up, but it's not standard practice. I do not value that type of work. I want it to be done, within the normal bounds. And if there's a lot extra to do, because it's my show, I'll do it. I'm the one more likely to work on the weekends and nights. So there's part of that I feel responsible for, but the part of it where I recognize their talents and what they bring. That's no problem. And in fact, I mean, that's one of the reasons why you have an editor, and Katie is an exceptional editor. And in a way, when you hire an editor or you hire a producer, especially as the host, you're basically hiring someone to be your boss. You're hiring someone to tell you what's good and what's bad and what to take out. And fundamentally, the reason why you put it in is because you disagree with that notion. But you rest on their good judgment, even at the time you might be conflicted about it. So yeah, it's important to delegate that stuff out, because you need multiple minds to make something as good as possible. But it was extremely hard for me. It was not natural.
Yeah, as somebody who's been in people management myself for 15, 17 years, the one thing that I had to learn was that if you don't delegate, then you don't allow people to find their own sense of value in their contribution. So,
Right.
There are a lot of people now that maybe not quite as much as you, but those other 6, 7 people are going to be carrying around the badge of 99% invisible just as much as you, and want to have a sense of pride and contribution and accomplishment. And if you're allowing them to do that, that's how, the team becomes really loyal.
Yeah, well, that's totally true. I say that for the most part, my problem was the opposite. Since I was such a kind of self-starter, independent person, my biggest problem was providing guidance and mentorship, which was not a natural position for me. Like, I just work a little bit differently than they do. In fact, I mean, I go into work in the office 2 days a week because I need time to be alone to work. I work differently than they really thrive on their community and their collaboration together, whereas my practice is a little more solitary. And so it was much more likely for me to have uncomfortable, the friction, I think, in our show would be someone comes in and like Avery, who was brand new, had never done a full piece before. And she would pitch something. I'd go, that sounds good. Just make it and come back to me. And so I gave them a lot of freedom in that way. And someone like her, who is just preternaturally gifted, can come back to you and rise to that occasion. But there's some things that not everyone's fantastic at, and I need to provide a little bit more guidance. So I'm kind of learning to try to do all that stuff. It's not natural for me because I'm a little bit more of a like, okay, just let me do it because I can do it fast, and but it's letting some of that go, but also teaching at the same time. For the most part, I think that the team has real pride, and they also have a real voice in the show. Like, people know my team, like people who are regular listeners, they know the names, they know their personalities, and that was really valuable to me, that they didn't just get kind of absorbed into this just the 99% invisible machine. Like, I wanted them to retain their integrity and then come out of this, if they don't work for me forever, which I hope they do, but if they don't, they come away that this was a really good experience, that people got to know them and they became kind of a personality on their own.
There's a bad joke somewhere in here, Roman, and I can't put my finger on it. You didn't want the team to be 99% invisible, but you do, but I don't know what it is. So I'll leave it. Speaking of the name, that's one thing I really wanted to ask you was, what's the origin story behind the name?
So in the beginning, when I was trying to figure out what the show was going to be about, I knew it was going to be about design and architecture, but like what the angles were, we convened a bunch of meetings at the AIA in San Francisco with landscape architects and product designers and graphic designers and architects. And at some point, Gary Strang, who was a landscape architect, he had this book called Massive Change by Bruce Mau. And he was quoting in the introduction, which was Bruce Mau kind of quoting Buckminster Fuller, something about the 99% invisible activity that shapes the world, and that 99% of who you are is invisible and untouchable. And I was trying to think of a name for the show that didn't involve the word design. I was very uninterested in using the word design in the title. And when we all went around the room, that was the consensus, was that if they were doing their jobs right as designers, for the most part, they were 99% invisible. Like their process was invisible. Things just worked when they were designed well. And so it was so evocative to me to have this notion that even an object as big as a skyscraper, that the bulk of its mass, like the story behind it and all the intention that went into making it, was even greater. Like that thing was only 1% of what it was, that the 99% of what a skyscraper is invisible. And that was a way I could craft all kinds of stories to tell what I thought were really evocative and interesting stories about the built world, to let you know that there's mysteries and intention and smart people and weird decisions and bad decisions sometimes in everything that was around them. And so that's where the name came from. And what was so amazing about it was that once we hit upon it, like everyone loved it immediately. It was like decided instantly. And but it was also the thing that kind of catalyzed the whole enterprise in a way, because it was really meaningful to me. And then about a year later, the Occupy movement started, and the chant of like, we are the 99% started, and we started to get really confused with people in, well, it was the show about the invisible people who like right. who are missing out on the, in the capitalist world and sort of stuff like that. And but I decided to sort of tough it out, and I'm glad I did, because it was so critical to the origin story that I couldn't imagine changing it or what it was going to be about. So.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a absolutely perfect name, and I'll tell you, just as one listener feedback, what I thought about it when I first started getting into the show. I don't know what it was, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when I heard 99% Invisible and started listening to a few episodes, it became clear, and my interpretation was, like you said, great design being almost invisible. I was thinking a lot about movies. Your set designer, your costume designer, mm-hmm. your sound designer. If they're doing their job right, you're enveloped into the movie. You're not thinking about the costume design or the set design or the sound design. That if they're doing a really great job, you don't notice that, and that means it's great. And that's one way I've always looked at it. So.
It's totally true. That's definitely was part of it. I mean, and also it was the idea that I wanted the show to celebrate design. And you tend to only notice design when it fails. And so if we were going to talk about the 99% invisible part of design, we were going to talk about success in a different way. Right. And so, yeah, that was all part of it, which is funny. I mean, I've never explained except for in situations like this, there's never been a moment in the show where I've said, here's what the show is about. Here's what the title means. But like yourself, people totally get it. When I felt the best about the show in the very beginning was when people began sort of, they would feed the thesis back to me without me being explicit about the thesis. Like they got the show and told me what the show was about. And that was extremely gratifying.
And I want to talk about some of those episodes. We're gonna move to Radiotopia here in just a minute, as I know that is a huge story with all things Roman Mars right now. But before I leave specifically 99% Invisible, in that interview I alluded to with Google that you can find on YouTube, you talked about how there were any number of episodes that you had killed in shop, like in process, mm-hmm. and what have you. Looking back, as you guys are quickly approaching 200 episodes, at least in my iTunes feed by the episode number.
Right.
Are there any regrets? Anything that maybe you once killed and then brought back later? Any great stories around those?
Most things are killed for a really good reason. So rarely do I feel that way. I more often feel the other way, which is a show came out that was, this hasn't happened in a while, but it was pretty good, but like, if I would have had more resources at the time, I would have killed it for something better. So I have more regret like that than the other. It's pretty rare for me to like let go of a piece and then go, oh, we should have done that anyway. For the because like episodes like that are really, really hard. And if there's one that is not working, it doesn't get easier. Like it just gets harder from there. So there's plenty that I would say, like if I were to look through all of them, which I never do really, for fear of hating them. I could think of a few that I would like. Oh, that wasn't fully cooked. That we should have. That could have waited or could have not gone out at all. That would have been okay.
But never gotten to the point where you literally pulled it out.
Oh, out of the feed? No, it's out there in the world. It's okay. I mean, it's that would be a little too much. But there would be there's definitely ones that I think could be better.
Well, I'm willing to bet most people probably couldn't pick those out.
No, they can't. And the favorite ones, like I never know what people are going to love and what they don't. So I could be wrong about that, but I know what they, for me, what they were like, so.
Well, I haven't heard a bad episode in, I don't know if ever, and if it ever was, I don't recollect it at this point, so it's been a super long time, if that's the case. So let's move on to Radiotopia, and I want you, if you could, to the best of your ability, you're 99% Invisible is up and running, it's doing great. How do you move from that to all that Radiotopia is today? Did you start to have thoughts and conversations about bringing other shows in? Like, what is that thought process?
So what happened was, when 99 was first starting out, I was the curator and host of this online and satellite and even over the air stream called Public Radio Remix, or became PRX Remix, or lots of different names, but had Remix in the name and PRX in the name almost always. And I had done the very first Kickstarter for 99% Invisible, and it was in the public radio world. In the podcast world in general, it really changed. It was a real game changer for both me personally, but also people realized, this short form thing that doesn't really have a place on the radio could get enough support to fund it and another person, and it was really kind of stunning to watch it happen. And it was kind of stunning in our little world of public radio. And so I was on a retreat with PRX, mainly in my capacity as the remix curator. And we were just doing that sort of blue sky thing that you do at a retreat, which is like, well, what should PRX be doing? What does the media landscape need? All that sort of stuff. And the pitch I made was basically, what if we could help give a significant amount of money to the really talented people we know who are not really functioning inside the public radio system, so that they can make their shows, use the model of 99% Invisible to create their shows into a little business. And the intention, even though PRX is a public radio institution, the intention is never to really gear it towards public radio. It's meant to be digitally distributed. And that was the beginning of it. And we thought about, we collectively sort of got a prototype grant from the Knight Foundation to sort of help figure out if it was worth it to do. So it would money that would go to the creators, and then spin up their production capability, like know that we could help pay for them. And then as they spun up their production capability, we could help sell their ads for them. And then eventually they get their legs and they become self-sufficient. And that was the whole idea. The whole idea was, I didn't want the success of 99% Invisible to exist in a vacuum. Like, I thought that it was a new model for how really talented audio producers, mainly the ones I knew in public media just because I knew those people, could exist. And so that was what that was all about, that collectively we could figure that stuff out together, and 99% Invisible wouldn't just exist on its own, and be only one show out there. So that's kind of how it started. And then it was founded with sort of me and PRX, And we just started to assemble all of the people we were huge fans of, and who were in different stages. I mean, sometimes the show, like Benjamin Walker's Theory of Everything was in different states of existing, and he was thinking about doing, he was doing an hour long at WFMU, but he could do more and release regularly if he did not an hour long episode for a podcast. And then there were folks like, the Kitchen Sisters and Radio Diaries, which have a really strong and important presence on NPR in the sort of legit public radio world. But their podcast was, they didn't really have a lot of control over it and didn't know like what to do with it. And so it was a little bit to make those into more like shows. And so we there was no one way to be a Radiotopia show, except for we gravitated towards sound rich narrative story-based shows. And that's how it started. It was it wouldn't have been satisfying to me if 99% Invisible was alone in this sort of podcast revolution. So that's what Radiotopia, and that's why the name is what it is. It's sort of like we're creating a world where it's good to be a radio producer. So the Radiotopia is like our sort of over the top kind of idea of what the land of where radio producers are valued, where they can exist and thrive.
Now, Radiotopia is, if I've got my information here correct, about 2 years old, or approaching 2 years old, give or take. When you were kind of getting this together in your head and thinking about making something bigger and larger than 99PI, that means being about 2 years old. Radiotopia wasn't the first collective or network or anything like that out there in the podcast space. Were there other networks or collectives that you sort of looked at as inspiration or thought, maybe I like what they're doing in this way, and this one over here, I like how they're doing this, and maybe kind of influence sort of what you created?
Well, there was nothing like a collective in the public radio world, that's for sure.
Right.
So it predated that, and these discussions really predated all that stuff, because these were before. I mean, because it took another year and a half before that 2 year marker, to get to the point where Radiotopia existed. I would say one of my big inspirations was Jesse Thorne, who has Maximum Fun, and he has a real presence in the public radio world on Bullseye, and also had started with a lot of sort of comedy stuff, but it's complete now. It's a really well-rounded culture and arts and comedy network. And there was something about it was also listener supported. It was a real family vibe, and I was a ongoing. I give $10 a month to Maximum Fun, which I have for I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years at this point. And so he was a big inspiration to me. He continues to be. I think he's really smart, and he tends to be the first through the wall in a lot of these ways, which it's a tough position to be in. Like he's the first person I ever knew who interviewed comedians on a podcast, like ever, like a decade ago. So he was a huge inspiration, but beyond that, there wasn't all that much. And so there was something about, like we definitely wanted to create these smaller little gems of stories and create this form factor that was similar to 99, that we kind of valued these 10 to 20 minute, maybe 30 minute pieces. It had a public radio aesthetic, maybe a little more edgy and daring, but other than Max Fun, there wasn't a whole lot we were sort of, or I personally was trying to emulate.
So at launch, you guys, and I'm going to get this wrong, did you guys have 8 at launch?
Oh, no, when we launched, that's going to test me. I'm going to say it was me. It was me, The Truth, Theory of Everything, Strangers, Radio Diaries, and The Kitchen Sisters, Fugitive Waves. So I'm going to say 6.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
It's in the ballpark.
And then during the first Kickstarter, we greenlit Criminal, The Heart, and The Illusionist, and Mortified came on board. And then after that, Song Exploder and Memory Palace came on board.
And now you're at 13, I think?
Yeah.
Yes.
Love and Radio was also a launching one. I totally forgot about Love and Radio, but they were there from the beginning too. So yeah, they're core team.
Gotcha. 13. So here's one of my really big questions. I think Radiotopia has been hugely influential, not just for me as a listener, and I've had several of your the roster of Radiotopia as previous guests, but I think all in all in storytelling podcasts, if you will, to use that term. I mean, I've spoken to several people in sort of smaller collectives or other individual standalone podcasts, things like Members of the Herd come to mind, or Megan Tan with Millennial, so on and so forth, that I think have really sort of picked up, the avant-garde that Radiotopia has demonstrated and sort of shown it as, a successful product to put out there, that these shows have been very, very successful as well. My question is, you must have people knocking at your door regularly to come and join this party. So I'm kind of curious from kind of your position in this whole group, what is sort of your mindset and approach to adding new shows? You talked about how different ones have come in. Are you actively looking? Are you always kind of got your eyes open, or sort of what is this process like for you?
Yeah, I always have my eyes open. We have a forum on the Radiotopia website that allows people to, it's not really obvious, but people submit their podcast or what they're doing. It's a pretty high bar, and because we're a different, we're under an umbrella of PRX, which is a nonprofit. We don't take a lot of, we don't, there's no profit in Radiotopia. We don't have this imperative to grow just for no reason, we don't, we're not trying to just get as many shows as possible. And because our group is extremely tight, and there's a kind of high touch, relationship with the people at PRX who facilitate like our ads and ad serving and various other things and the fundraising. It's very hard to add new shows, so we do it extremely carefully. But we always are looking, because the whole idea is to get the best and provide a framework so that they can be successful, and that there's a good diversity of talent and voices, but it takes a certain kind of a combination of a really talented producer, a strong and interesting voice, an entrepreneurial person who really values owning their own show, which is not how a lot of them work. And they really have to bet on themselves in a certain way. We provide a lot of the path, and we provide a lot of resources, but it's up to them to be great. And so we, it's hard. We don't have, we talk and now, last year we hired, Julie Shapiro, who I knew at Third Coast and was at, ABC Radio National in Australia. And, a lot of her job right now is to sort of figure out, how we add people, how we onboard them. What does it mean? What are we looking for? What are the holes in our roster, and how we can do the most good. And so it's tough, and we get submissions every day, and I get people send me stuff all the time. Luckily, I'm a real, I love radio, I love podcasts, I listen to a ton of them, I try them out, but it is really hard to do the shows that we do, and And so it takes a real special show, but you definitely hear it. You hear real spark from people. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's nothing about, like, I don't value like a super slick production necessarily. Like I make sure that my show sounds good, but like that's not necessarily the thing I'm looking for. I just like a good point of view or a good, sharp, incisive voice. And I also really value someone who doesn't waste my time, like who edits the work and, really like is very careful, really serves the audience. These are things I really look for and care about. But it's really hard. We're small. We're not profit driven. So adding a person or adding a show takes away resources. It takes a lot of time. And because we were really responsible to the people that we already have in the group, it takes a real special situation to make that happen.
And I want to talk a little bit about those people in the group, because I know you guys have gotten together a little bit. I've seen them on Twitter. I believe you were in London not long ago, because Helen was tweeting pictures. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about these hosts and producers that you get along with, because we were talking before I hit record that it just seems like a really great group of people. I've had a very fortunate to get a chance to have these types of conversations with several of them. I imagine this whole group is just wonderful to work with.
They really are. I mean, they're true friends. Like people like Benjamin Walker is like my brother as far as I'm concerned. Like I've known him about as long as I've been in radio, and so we're really tight. A lot of that beginning crew, and then Nick Vanderkolk I've known for over a decade, and Nate. We kind of all existed in the public radio world together. And Joe from Radio Diaries, and I worked for the Kitchen Sisters about a decade ago as well. So I've known all these people in different, because the public radio world is not very big, and so and in the public radio world is like great. I mean, the first thing I loved about working in public radio is you look to your left, you look to your right, and these are people you want to be around. They're just amazing, and so. And I knew Jonathan Mitchell from The Truth. Like he used to live out here in the Bay Area, and we knew Leah Tao from Strangers, because she was the executive director of The Moth, and PRX had put out the Moth podcast, so I got to know her through that. So we just started to. They're all friends. They're all people that I admire. They're all people that I got to know. I got to know Helen at a South by Southwest, and I was a huge fan of her other podcast called Answer Me This, and so like if we're if I'm anywhere in Europe, I see Helen. It's just part of the thing. And if she's in the Bay Area, she stays at my house. So we are. So some of us are like have more of a history and are better friends than others, but I really respect them all. And I really value their talent. I mean, the hard part of that type of relationship, and because we were I think storytellers and artists first, rather than commercial broadcasters, the decisions that we make based off of what type of ads, how you want to do things, how you want to monetize. These are really personal decisions that we have to navigate with each and every show. We don't own them. They're not our employees. So we have to sort of negotiate all these things with everybody for the best interests of them and the best interest of the group. And so that's the hard part of working with your friends and family. It becomes stickier. And but it's it's worth it. I don't know how to do it any other way. So our relationships with everybody is not transactional. It's much more emotional. And when we get together, it's a really joyful experience. In fact, the only times where it's especially hard to be in Radiotopia, because we do things like a kind of complicated, individually specific way, I find that the hardest time to be in Radiotopia is when we are apart, and we've been apart for a long time, and we haven't come together, and we don't get reinforced of why we're choosing this way to do things rather than something much more, simple, like an employer-employee relationship. But when we get together, it's really obvious. Like it's really satisfying. So we look for those occasions. We try to get together as many people as we can, twice a year, and it's like my favorite part of the year.
I'll tell you what, it's a brilliant roster that you've assembled, and I'm scrolling through and looking at it and thinking about all the number of times that I've literally been blown away by an episode, and so many of these shows. And I debated saying this, but I'll be honest because I've always been honest. And I want to just say, I'm not going to ask you this question because I don't think it would be fair to ask you, but I just want to say, and you can comment if you wish, if I were to pick the number one, what I consider to be the most underrated Radiotopia show, to me, it's got to be The Truth. I mean, what a phenomenal show they do. I have not had a chance to speak with Jonathan yet, and it has been, I always pop one of those new episodes to the top of my playlist. I love what they're doing in terms of the storytelling and the dramatic acting, and the one with in the classroom with the teacher and the gun and all that blew my mind. I literally took my headphones off and gave it to my wife and said, "You have to hear this." And that's amazing when a show can do that.
The Truth is stunning, and it was one of those things that it kind of exemplifies why Radiotopia existed in the first place. So The Truth existed in the kind of public radio world at different companies to become a show. It never could quite figure out how to do it, where its place was going to be in the public radio ecosystem, and it was really hard for them for a long time. And it's still obviously not easy. They do a show that's exceptionally hard and expensive, and it's hard to provide everything they need to do the job. But we're doing the best we can, and they're working really, really hard. But it's one of the quintessential examples of why Radiotopia exists, because we saw what Jonathan was doing, and he was always in the mix. So like when Radiotopia first existed, it was always just The Truth has got to be involved. So I totally agree with you. And it's like a thing that just, like the quality of it could put it anywhere.
Yeah.
But it because of the news focus of public media, it didn't have it could never gain purchase in that world. And so I'm really glad there's a venue for it just to be what it is. Exactly. And that makes me extremely happy, for sure.
And I don't want to, I'm not saying any of the other shows. I mean, I love them all, and so many of them are great for all their own reasons, but I just wanted to mention that because I think maybe because, like you said, it's so expensive to produce and takes so long, and maybe they don't get the attention I think it deserves because it's several weeks between episodes or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. But when it comes out, it's clear why that's the case.
Totally. It's totally
out quickly.
No, he's like a real artist. I mean, sound design artist, and this is really hard stuff, and the part of the, I don't know, it's one of the reasons why we have to stay small. We can't, I can put out a weekly episode now that I have so many people, but most of these shows just simply can't, and because they're just too hard. And that's a perfect example of that. It's just really, really hard to make that show, and you hear it. You really hear how much effort they put into it.
And we talked about all these efforts that go into, and what I want to talk about to kind of wrap up our conversation here, Roman, is sort of that cost that goes into this. You mentioned a little bit the advertising, and I love the way all of you guys do it. It's very respectful advertising, and there's even some innovation, especially in the way some of the Helen comes to mind with the illusion with her word of the word of the day or what have you, reading the word. So I mean, there's obviously that, and most listeners are going to be familiar with that. But what they may not be quite familiar with, and I want you to talk a little bit about, is sort of, you mentioned Kickstarter at a time, but you guys have moved away with that more. And is it fair to call a membership model or something similar?
Yeah, I think so. So I did 3 Kickstarters. I did 2 for 99% Invisible, and then 1 for Radiotopia there when we kind of launched. And then and Kickstarter was so important for us. Like, it made my show possible. It made everyone pay attention to it. But there's something about it's in this. Kickstarter is really about starting a new project and it having a timeline and it finishing and you completing it and fulfilling it. And we didn't, we wanted an ongoing thing and know that we had money coming in to support the things that we really cared about. And so we moved to a sustaining member drive. So instead of, donating $60 to get a t-shirt, you pledge to donate $5 a month, which is basically the equivalent. And we'd kind of know what we were in for 2016 and then maybe 2017. And the drives would be a little less intense because a 30-day Kickstarter drive, it's really, it really drains you. And you never know if you're going to build upon, what you made or not. But now we can, talk to these folks that value what we're creating at Radiotopia and the different way that we're doing things. And we can make decisions based on that. And, having membership, or I don't know what to call it, but having sort of regular donors be a part of it really allows us to make decisions like that about other aspects of the creative enterprise. Like, for example, like I listen to tons of podcasts. I don't judge them in this way, but I don't really want to do a pre-roll ad or a mid-roll ad. I have a single story. It can't really be divided. So I put all the ads at the end. That costs my show a lot of money, to do that. It's not a choice that I've, as I alluded to it in the last drive. It's my choice. It's perfectly acceptable. I could move it around if I had to. But one of the reasons why I can make choices like that and make choices based on aesthetics is because we have this base of support from, these 20 to 30,000 people who give a little bit to make this whole thing greater than it ever could be without them. And this really comes from, I come from public radio, and so I think it's worth it to pitch in to get the media that you deserve. And I think that the stuff that we make is really special, and it deserves a certain amount of support. And luckily other people agree.
And I think again, as I was sort of talking about with sort of the Radiotopia stable of shows, I think your approach is also influential. The first time your name, or one of the times I know for sure your name has been brought up on my show before, was back in September of last year, episode 56. And I know he's had conversations with you over the years and talk with him. Aaron Mankey of Lore cites you as a big influence, and also you can see with Lore, he has his ads as a post-roll. It's at the end, and a lot of what he's doing, I can see a lot of Roman Mars kind of flowing through his work, if you will.
Well, I mean, it's super flattering. I'm glad he's found so much success. I know we connect a little bit on Twitter. I don't know him personally, but I think between like him and also The Herd, when I heard about this other podcast collective that was really like looking to share resources and even call themselves a collective in a certain way rather than a network or a business, that's super satisfying to me. Like Radiotopia can't be in all those places with all those people, but if we could lead by example and more work is created that is really valuable and finds an audience, like that is really meaningful to me. I don't need to have my fingers in all of that, right. Like they can, I'm proud that we've had I think that we've been a good force in the world, and I'm proud of it. And I'm glad that, like, I don't have to raise money for them because they can do it on their own. Like, they're perfectly capable. And especially Aaron, he's totally proved that. He's like a really successful Patreon and stuff like that. And
now he's speaking of podcast movement this coming year, I just saw.
Yeah, that's great. And he'll have a lot of really good lessons because he really took it outside on his own. And I totally respect and value that. I think one of the, there's a little bit of a land grab now where we're trying to figure out like who goes where and what network does somebody want to join and stuff like that. I think that there's a lot of value in not joining anything. And I say this as a person who has one of these that would like, really good people to join, but it's important to like control what you're making. And I think that's the biggest lesson of Radiotopia and 99% Invisible is like control your work, own your work, and bet on yourself. And you could do really amazing things if you choose that path.
I want to end with just one quick question. I know you're not a quote unquote designer yourself. You mentioned in previous conversations that you're what was it, consumer of design.
Or like I'm a kind of a professional appreciator. Yeah.
I wanted to ask this question because one, I think you might be listening at some point. My son is a high school senior and he is a graphic designer. That's what he wants to go to school for. If you had a bit of advice to give a young budding designer, what would be kind of a tenet or two that they should keep in mind for their work?
I would keep in mind that I think that the story of design is more important than the aesthetics of design. So what I've learned in covering this as a subject is that think of the designer as a problem solver. Even a graphic designer who's trying to make something beautiful, fundamentally they're trying to solve a problem. So be aware of what those problems are that need to be solved. Work with good people that bring that, want you to solve them in good ways. And also be prepared to tell the story of the thing that you made, because people can be seduced and fall in love with a story in a different way than they react to something that is just presented beautifully. And you can sort of get people to love I don't want to say like an ugly thing, but basically an ugly thing if you tell them why it is the way it is in a certain way. And so that is my fundamental lesson of design is that the story of design is like the real universal language of design is a story rather than aesthetics.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Roman, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Podcast Digest. It's really been a privilege to talk to you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
If you would like, take a minute, tell everybody where they can follow you and the show and Radiotopia on Twitter, the social networks, anything like that.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Roman Mars. We also have a Twitter for the show that's at 99pi.org. And or not .org, it's just 99pi.org. And then the show is at 99pi.org. And then radiotopia.fm to subscribe to all the different Radiotopia shows. Every one of them is worth your time. And then my partner with Radiotopia is prx.org, and they do amazing things in the public radio world. In addition to distributing like This American Life and stuff like that. Like they do lots of big things besides this. And so they're always good to check in with because they're always on the vanguard.
And folks, I'm going to have links to all of that in the show notes. And in fact, a link to something else. I had so many things I wanted to talk to you about, Roman. I didn't even get into your TED Talk, which is amazing. We've talked this long, and I didn't bring that up. But I want to be respectful of your time. But folks, I will put a link into the show notes for Roman's TED Talk, which is amazing. I told my son about it, budding designer. I said, it's like a podcast delivered live on stage.
Yeah.
I said, you got to watch this. So go check that out as well, folks. That is something that is amazing as well. So many great things that you're doing, Roman. Again, thank you very much for your time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Folks, that'll do it for this week on the Podcast Digest. Until next week, my name's Dan Lizette, and I will talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.